And that is why it is so good for, thanks, Jesse, for sellers particularly. Let's get rid of that. Okay, the last one was the hotline's getting, surprise, surprise, a lot of calls from agents doing leases and helping landlords and asking questions that the hotline feels is are so basic that no one should be touching leases and representing landlords without knowing this stuff. Okay, so it's just kind of a warning. I mean, they answer your questions and I'm sure they point you in the right direction, but they're getting very nervous. They're getting very nervous about the kind of questions they're getting. So if you are doing any, because almost everyone's got a lease here or there somewhere, right? You get a past client wants to do a lease and you feel like you should do it even though you don't do them. Just make sure you know what you're doing. Okay, make sure that you look at the checklist, that you know what documents you have to have and what you have to give. Most of it comes out with the lease, so there's not a whole bunch of other stuff, but there's some stuff, and there are some new documents that are pretty important. So that's all I'm saying is that's what they're saying. Okay, so does anyone have any questions on any of those things? No, you just can't wait to get to procuring cause, huh? Okay.
I want more information about what you were saying about the fire
The insurance?
Yes, because I live in Fallbrook and that's definitely
All fire, yeah.
So if I can have some information.
Yeah, let's see if let me see if we can find an insurance person to come talk to us about it.
Okay, sounds even better.
Might as well, instead of me learning it and then telling you, might as well try to hear it from the, I don't want to say
directly from them.
Insurance person's, yeah. Mouth. Okay, so
Good.
let me see if I can work on that for next week.
Okay, thank you, Cindy.
I think it's important and it is going to be a big issue.
Thank you.
Okay, I will share my screen. Share. You guys over here. Okay. I don't know why I don't just put that on the screen where my camera is, but I don't. Okay. Okay, so the couple of things we're going to start. Procuring cause, everyone has an opinion about what it is. It changed over the years. And I don't know if it was 2 years ago or 4 years ago, but recently there was a big change. It was either a court or NAR that came out with these whole new guidelines that are now the guidelines. So what's important to know, and it says it over and over in this, is the procuring cause, it's a factors test. And it doesn't have a triggering event that will give a sure result. So there is no scale where this has, here are the 10 factors. This one's the most important. This one's not so important. There are a lot of factors, but there's no weight to any one factor, except for I would say that is not true because there is a lot of weight given to a buyer-broker agreement. And in my opinion, the only way, unless it's just like obvious horrible things, the only way you're going to win a procuring cause as a buyer's agent is to have a buyer-broker agreement, because if you don't have one, they can work with as many brokers as they want, and it's not that hard to prove. You haven't done very much if all you did was introduce them to the property or show them the property and you never did another thing. So again, for buyer's agents, having a buyer-broker agreement, even though it says that there's not one thing, that's the most huge thing that would prove that you have the right. And we, in fact, went to an arbitration with some of our agents who closed a property, and they knew that the buyer had a buyer-broker agreement, but they just kind of ignored it. And we went to the hearing and they lost. They had to pay their commission back to the other side. So it's probably the most important factor. I mean, it is, even though they'll say there isn't. Okay. And then these are NAR rules, and NAR prohibits a local association from coming up with different rules. In our association, this is how we're going to find procuring cause, X, Y, and Z. Nope, you can't do that. You have to follow these. Doesn't mean that that's not how you train your arbitrators, but it, you know, that's a whole nother story. Okay, there's the NAR's definition of procuring cause is the uninterrupted series of causal events, causal events, which result in the successful transaction. And if you read that, wouldn't you think that if you only showed the property and someone else did all the other work, that would be an automatic loss? Because it's not under, your work wasn't uninterrupted. So I don't know. I know that's their definition, but I'm not sure how they interpret it because I don't think that's the truth. Okay. Okay, who has the burden of proof? So we're going to arbitration or a lawsuit if you, but it's probably arbitration. And how do we know who, what if the panel can't decide? How do we know? Well, the broker who files the arbitration carries the burden of proof to demonstrate by a preponderance of the evidence why he or she is the procuring cause. Preponderance of the evidence is 51%. So if at the end of the hearing, in the arbitrator's mind, I don't know, they say they did the, you know, he didn't prove, she didn't do this, she didn't, then the person who brought the claim loses. They have to prove by 51% more of the evidence why they're the procuring cause. Okay. Okay, so usually the broker filing the complaint is the one who doesn't have the commission, right? I'm the procuring cause, but you collected the commission. Okay, so the broker who has to prove that he or she is entitled to the commission. In the case in which the complainant did write the contract, however, the arbitration is needed to release funds from escrow, or it's needed to release funds from escrow. He or she, as the complainant, would have the burden to show why he or she is entitled to the commission. So it doesn't matter whether they're being held by escrow or whether they've already been paid. You still have to prove that you had the right. Okay, here's the factors. Again, they tell you the chart should not be used as a numerical system to give points to one side or the other. In given circumstances, some factors will not be present, others should be given more weight. Accordingly, the chart should serve as a guide to raise and consider relevant issues. And you'll see when you get to the end, they do some examples, but they don't come out with answers. They just say it's hard to say. It depends on what the panel thinks. Okay, so all of the factors are put into 4 groups. Connection to the transfer. So the first 7 factors include the relationship of both brokers to the buyer in the transaction. I mean, yeah. Since the broker must be the procuring cause as it relates to the property and transaction in question. It can't be in general or anything else. Okay. The questions 8 to 10 focus on why the buyer left the intro broker. They call the intro broker the one that didn't get the commission and the closing broker the one who did get the commission. Why did they leave? That's why when I tell you, you have to ask, why aren't you using that broker anymore? Well, because I asked 4 questions. He didn't know any answers. He didn't get back to me. He didn't, you know, that kind of stuff. Broker conduct. Factors 11 through 18 are on the conduct of the closing broker. So did they do anything they shouldn't have done? And 19 through 23 deal with contractual and other issues that are relevant. Okay. Oh, and it refers a lot to the BRBC. You know, that's the buyer representation and broker compensation agreement. It can, and this is what's important about this. Okay, so the BRBC contains a default. So if you don't check any boxes, it defaults to a non-exclusive representation agreement. Okay. Which provides for payment of compensation to the broker only if there was sufficient broker involvement with the property. Broker involvement is defined as all of these things, showing the property either in person or virtually, submitted an offer for them, or it was introduced to them. Okay, so that lots of people have that maybe, right? If that's all you needed for procuring cause was broker involvement, then a lot of people would have that. But now we're going back to, you have a buyer broker agreement. Do you have one of those things? Because if you just had them sign the agreement, but you never did another thing, you never introduced them to a property, you never did anything, you're not going to win. Okay. But again, what's important here is that it defaults to non-exclusive representation, and there's a box you have to check if you want it to be exclusive. And if it's non-exclusive, then you're going to have to show more because you didn't have the right to do, to the sole right to do it. You only had a right if you brought in the buyer. You'd have to prove you brought the buyer. I mean, you brought the property. I'm sorry, the property. Okay. The form also contains an exclusive representation option. If the broker and the buyer agree to exclusive representation by checking a box that's in the middle of a sentence, by the way, so you might miss it. The broker is entitled to compensation if the buyer acquires property identified in the contract during the representation period. So this is really, if you have this, you're good. I have a buyer broker agreement and I showed you a whole bunch of properties. I didn't have to necessarily show this one, but I did my work until I find out that you went to somebody else. Okay, broker involvement with property is not necessary for the broker to be entitled to compensation. So if you have this broker agreement, where property? Yeah. Okay. Right, because if the buyer goes to someone else, obviously you couldn't have, you didn't have to have broker compensation, right? If you have an agreement with your buyer and they completely go to a whole nother agent, they're saying that the broker involvement is not necessary to prove, because how could you have had involvement? You didn't even know. Okay, so this is the chart, and it came out a little weird when I cut and pasted it, but it's they divided up into factors that favor the introduction broker, which is the first column, or the closing broker, because there's certainly factor, each one of these factors favors somebody. But again, there's no test. This is you're sitting in a panel of arbitrators, which would probably be 3 people at a board at the board, because the board does these kind of arbitrations. You're not, it's always the board of the person being, not the person bringing it, but the other person. So if the other person belongs to PWR, then that's where you have to bring your arbitration. So it's important to know the factors, but again, what you would do if you had one of these is you would take this chart and you would put your factors in. Which ones do I have? How would I fill this out? And then go back and try to figure it out. Because if there's no buyer representation agreement, it's way harder. Okay, so who first introduced buyer to the property, right? That favors the introduction broker, of course. Closing broker never showed the property. So you closed this, but you never even showed you never even went to the property with them. Okay. But again, that could be not true. It could be not true. Okay, intro broker wrote and presented an offer on the property on behalf of the buyer, but the transaction was not consummated. Okay, so I even wrote an offer form. Gosh. Okay, closing broker wrote and presented an offer on behalf of the buyer, and that was substantially similar to an offer. Oh, second broker, closing broker presented an offer on the property that was substantially similar to an offer written by intro broker within a short time period. Well, that favors, you gave the same offer I had. What did I do wrong, right? Okay. It would be removed to neutral, right? If 2 offers are not close in substance or time. So if the first offer was like way less money or way more money, or something like that, which is usually the case, you're not usually making the same offer. A significant amount of time elapsed between the time intro broker last showed a property and closing broker wrote an offer on the same property. So yeah, you don't get it forever, right? You showed the property in January and they just didn't decide to buy it until November. And there's probably enough time has elapsed that this would be in favor of the closing broker. Okay, the intro broker provided significant information about the specific property, its neighborhood, value of the property, financing, and other issues. So they didn't just show you the property, they gave you all of this information. Okay. So that would favor them, right? They're doing work. They're not just showing you a property. They're analyzing the neighborhood and where it is and giving you the information that you need. Okay. Closing broker wrote and negotiated the offer and performed all the services during escrow. Okay, well, so you were second, but you wrote the offer. You did everything. Okay. How closing broker in it. Okay, so that favors closing broker, but notice it says consideration should be given to how closing broker entered the transaction. Just because you did all of those things, you wrote the offer, you negotiated it, and you followed it all the way through to closing, if you did something wrong in getting it, then you might lose. Then you might not be the procuring cause. So you have to, you know, if you go to this person and you convince them to leave the other broker, right? You're not going to win because you did something wrong, right? But you know, and here's the sad part for me that I think as a broker is that I think our agents, they would tell the truth. I really do. But these clients, they don't have the same interest you have. You know, you go in and you say, yeah, sure, my buyer, he'll tell you this, this, and this. And the buyer's like, yeah, I don't know. We've had this happen a few times. I don't know. I don't really want to get involved. Oh, okay. Well, now, you know, so a lot of this, anything that you learned has to be communicated in writing. You have to confirm it in writing, right? Because you don't want to get to the end and say, well, the reason I got this, the buyer came to me and he told me that this agent didn't know anything, give me a whole laundry list of things. And now the buyer's saying, I never did that. He came up to me and he said, you know, gee, I'm a better agent, just leave them and come to me. Huh. And now what are you going to do? You know you're telling the truth, but you can't prove it. So you want to have that confirmed in writing at the time. And if they didn't write back and say, I don't know what you're talking about, none of that happened, then then that helps. Okay. Okay, buyers, intro broker does not keep in touch with buyer after a period of time. Okay, so yeah, you signed an exclusive agreement with me for all of Riverside County, and I haven't heard from you. We looked at 2 properties the first week, and I haven't heard from you in 2 months. Do I need to still use you? Are you still my broker? Right? So, and again, whether the broker attempted to make contact, just because the buyer doesn't answer phone calls or return them, doesn't mean they didn't try. Okay, so you have to ask the right questions because it matters. Okay, intro broker is the listing broker. As a result of intro broker providing agency disclosure, the buyer elects to have separate representation. Okay, so yeah, so it's the listing broker. The buyer's broker didn't want to have dual representation. So, and they wouldn't sign the agency disclosure because they didn't want to have the same agent. Then sure, then you can take it over because they can't do it. They can't do it anyway. So that favors the closing broker, obviously. Buyer is dissatisfied with the intro broker due to the broker's professional abilities or conduct. Examples could include misrepresentations, failure to disclose, lack of knowledge, not being responsive. So again, this is what we want to know. When you get to the buyer and you say to the buyer, you know, oh, you saw this property with someone else. Why are you not going back to them? Well, first question is, did you sign a buyer representation or any kind of agreement? And the second question is, well, why are you unhappy? And most people have a reason. They don't just say, I don't know, I just don't like them anymore. They'll tell you what their reason is. If I ask questions, I didn't trust him. I think he lied to me. So you want to document that because that's what's going to make you win if this other broker comes back and says, wait a minute, this was our money. So you want to document that. Okay. And you also want to know, because you don't want to make the same mistakes, right? So you want to know, what is it about the other agent that really bugged this client? Because clearly you don't want to do the same thing. If he says, well, they didn't return calls for 2 days, well, then you'll go, yeah, no problem. I'll return mine, much quicker than that. But it just depends on what they say, but it's good for everything to know. Okay, broker conduct. Closing broker asked buyer's relationship with another broker early in the process and determined there was no existing contractual or exclusive relationship between intro buyer and the buyer. So you asked, you went to your buyer and you said, have you been working with any other brokers? And your buyer says, no, I haven't been working with any other brokers. Well, gosh, are you sure no one's introduced the no, nope. What can you do? I mean, you can only know what they tell you. Again, wouldn't it be nice to confirm that in writing? This will confirm that prior to our representation, you weren't working with anyone. I mean, I don't know if it's always going to be the case that you feel you need to, but you want to do this right. Okay, closing broker asked about buyer's relationship with other brokers late in the process. That goes towards the other side. If I'm already halfway through the transaction, when I say, oh, by the way, were you working with anyone else? Or they come, actually, it probably would be that they come in and say, oh yeah, that's the same thing the broker who showed me the property said. What? Someone showed you the property? And now I'm asking because you brought it up. So you don't want it, that doesn't favor you. That doesn't favor that you're doing the right thing as the broker who took it over. Brokers have an affirmative duty to inquire about existing relationships. You have to ask. Okay, closing broker instructed a buyer to go to open houses or make appointments for the buyer, or was aware that the buyer would be going to open houses and instructed the buyer to inform open house brokers of the buyer's relationship with closing broker. Okay, so that's good that we asked, that we told you, if you're going to go by yourself, here's my card, take my card. If you're going to go by yourself, make sure that you write down my name and number on a paper and tell the agent or whoever's doing the open house that you already are working with someone. Okay, doesn't mean they did or not. This is only saying that we instructed them. So it shows that we didn't mean to send them out there. We are really representing them. Okay. Intro broker was aware that the buyer would be going to open houses and told the buyer to inform other brokers of the buyer's relationship with intro broker. Okay. Those two are the same, huh? Closing broker instructed a buyer. Oh, was aware that buyer would be going.
One is intro versus the closing one.
Well, I know, and one instructed the buyer to go, and this one was aware that they would be going.
Yeah.
Huh. I don't know if that makes a difference. Or it was aware. Huh. So I guess that's a, but see this one that looks, I assume when it's blank like this, it's neutral. It's not just me that messed this up, right? No, it's just neutral. I don't know. Hold on. Oh, I don't have it up anymore. Okay. So those are the same. So it's a good thing when I'm sure you guys all do this, but if you're a buyer, whether they tell you they are, or you tell them to, or whether or not anything, if you always tell them, if they happen to see an open house and they go in, they should hand your card, hand your card to whoever's doing the open house. Closing broker does not belong to the MLS in which the property is listed, or any MLS in a reciprocal arrangement with the MLS, and has not made independent arrangements for a listing broker for a commission. Oh, well, obviously then you wouldn't be entitled to a commission if you aren't a member of the MLS and you didn't make other arrangements. Okay, closing broker is the listing broker. Neutral. Although the listing broker will get compensation for the listing side, this should not independently determine the outcome without reference to other factors. And again, a lot of times when closing broker is the listing broker, if you have to depend on the buyer, they're going to come in and say, well, they told me I couldn't get the property unless I used you as the broker, right? So anyway, I thought we had a rule that you had to have your camera on. Is that not for everyone? Closing broker. Okay, or was Robert kidding? I wasn't meaning to say. Was he kidding? No.
No, he was serious.
Oh.
Starts next week.
Oh, sorry. Okay, turn your cameras off. I just didn't want to get in trouble for not, following the rule. What's the second part? Okay, intro buyer has a buyer representation and broker. Oh, now we're getting to intro buyer has a buyer representation and broker compensation agreement with the exclusive representation option checked that contains a description of the property, which includes the subject property, and that is dated before the closing broker meets with the buyer. Probably a slam dunk winner. Do what they say. The exclusive intro establishes a close connection between them. The existence of an exclusive representation contract between the broker and buyer should be given significant weight. It's the only one they say that to. Although the level of intro broker's involvement with the property and the conduct of closing broker and their behavior also makes a factor. So it's basically, as long as you didn't do anything terrible, and as long as the intro broker didn't stay involved through the whole thing and not know know what was going on, you're gonna win with that buyer. That, which is of course why we tell you to use them. Okay, intro broker has a buyer representation and broker compensation. Oh, okay. So the intro broker has one or another form with a non-exclusive representation. So they didn't check the box for exclusive representation. Okay, So the buyer rep agreement with the non-exclusive representation option creates a contractual right to compensation intro broker and the buyer, not with us, but between the buyer and the broker. If the broker had a sufficient level of involvement with the subject property, the existence of a non-exclusive representation contract between the broker and the buyer should be given significant weight, although the level of the intro broker's involvement with the property and the conduct of closing broker determine the, again, will also be factors. So yeah, if the non-exclusive describes the property, that's why I mean, I don't know how many people are getting exclusive representation agreements for like whole counties or whole, let alone the tri-county area or 4 counties. I don't know if people are still doing that or if buyers are balking at it more, but certainly it needs to be only, it needs to be only as good as the area that they're really buying in. And the more narrow it is, the more likely it would be to be seriously enforced. I think that, as if you put 4 counties for a year, that could be, somebody could find that was kind of out there. Okay, closing broker, right, same thing, option check, that includes the description of the property, right? Closing broker is not deemed to be the procuring cost. Okay. Closing broker has a buyer representation. The closing broker has got the buyer rep agreement that contains a description of the property, because it has to have that. Okay, so the same as 19, that this factor may be overcome if the closing broker's behavior was inappropriate. Even if the closing broker is not deemed to be the procuring cause, they may still have a contractual right to be compensated by the buyer. So the closing broker could go after, I mean, the broker who didn't get the commission can go after the broker who did get the commission for procuring cause, but they also have a contract with the buyer that says that you'll pay me. So they could separately go, sue the buyer if they rather, and go after the buyer because they agreed to pay them if they bought the property in that area, during that time frame. Oh, okay. So now, same thing, the closing broker has a buyer rep agreement, but it's non-exclusive. Okay, so before they had an exclusive, they had an absolute right to the money. If their contract is non-exclusive, then they don't have an automatic right to it's different because the contract is non-exclusive. So they weren't the only one who could sell, right? If it's non-exclusive, it means if you buy these properties, you have to pay me, but if you buy someone else, you do not have to. So I don't know, these are kind of all the same. Directory failed to give agency. Oh, okay. So and this is the other issue. It's going to come up here under the practice, under the tips. Broker failed to give an agency disclosure statement. So if you use the buyer rep agreement, it comes out with an agency disclosure statement. CAR or NAR or the MLS, whoever makes the rules, has determined that the rule is that you really only have to get the disclosure, the agency disclosure from the buyer when you make an offer for the buyer. That's the rule, and that's what we have always done. And that's still the rule. However, there's some argument, and who CAR, obviously, when they wrote this, because this is fairly new, I think it's from 21, had a different opinion on that, because basically they're saying now that you should get an agency disclosure statement right away when you work with a buyer. That just working with the buyer, showing them properties, you want to have that agency relationship with the buyer, even if you don't have a buyer rep agreement. Either way, again, not required, and so no one's making a big deal out of it.
Hey, Cindy, wouldn't it be true that if you only have an agency disclosure agreement, that does not necessarily mean that you'll get paid. The broker, the other one, the other form, the buyer broker agreement, stipulates very clearly that you will be paid. Agency disclosure, in my understanding, is just you as an agent has to represent the buyer in the right way. it does not stipulate about being paid. Is that true?
Correct. It has nothing to, but when they're looking at, again, when they're looking at factors, they may say, well, you know, you don't, not only do you not have a buyer representation agreement, you don't even have an agency disclosure with this client. So who are, you know, you're
Right.
nobody, right?
So really, in essence, you really have to have the buyer broker agreement, correct?
It makes the most sense. And it, again, as I tell lots and lots of people, it makes the most sense if, even if that's all you limit it to is the properties you show. You know, you don't want to hire me to find you a property in all of Riverside County, fine. But if I introduce you to the property, then I want to be your broker. Okay, so these are some tips for practice, you know, so that you know kind of what to do. Always ask a prospective buyer whether he or she is working with another broker. Always, 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 always. If you find out that a prospective buyer is working with another broker, explore whether the first broker has an exclusive contract. Next question: do you have an exclusive agreement with the broker? Did you sign anything? Because they don't know what they're called, so you can't ask for it by name or something. You have to kind of describe it. If you discover your client has been working with another broker on the same transaction, try to ascertain the reason why the client left the first broker, and if appropriate, I don't understand this one. What does that mean on the same transaction? So they come to you and they say, I want to buy a property in this neighborhood, and you start showing them, and now you find out that they're working with another broker to do the same thing. Is that what they mean, do you think? Try to ascertain the reason why the client left the first broker. So that it should say, oh, it should say had been working, shouldn't it? If they left them anyway.
I wonder if they could also mean, it could also mean, I wonder, is sometimes they don't, they blame the agent when there's like 40 offers and they're not getting accepted, and then offer submitted and they call another agent. Can you submit an offer? Because I don't really know if the other agent submitted the offer or not
Yeah.
on the same property. I've got those calls.
Ascertain.
And I'm like, okay.
Try to ascertain why the client left the first broker, and if appropriate, make immediate contact with the broker and try to resolve the issue. So basically they're saying, well, gee, if you find out that someone had this before you, I don't know, failing to address it early on. Obviously, if you find there's any kind of an issue, you have to address it early on. We always say that, hit it, if you're not sure, hit it in the face, and we'd rather know now than when you close. Okay, give the agency disclosure. So see, they say that early in the transaction, and by transaction, they mean early in working with a buyer. Because obviously we give it when we have when we actually have a purchase agreement, everybody signs the AD. Or when we have a listing agreement, we sign the AD or a purchase agreement. So, but they're suggesting that you get it earlier. I've heard this before from Carr. But again, when they said it, they said the same thing as well. It's really not the rule, and you don't really have to do it, and no one's going to be penalized for not doing it. So, okay, but maybe for procuring cause, it helps. Okay, use Carr form BRBC when working with a buyer. It memorializes the relationship. You know all the good reasons, right? Never send your buyer clients your buyer client to other brokers with instruction to come back when the buyer is ready to write the offer. Gee. Go look at that open house with that other broker, and when you're ready to write the offer, come on back. Huh? Am I representing you or am I not? This is just their suggestions. Okay. Try to accompany your clients to open houses, but if you can't, give your clients your cards and instruct them to tell the agent sitting in the open house, I thought I fixed that, at the open house, that they are already working with you, and present them your card. By not accompanying them, you take the risk that this explanation may not occur, right? They go up to the listing agent, they have a conversation, the listing agent maybe even asks them, are you working with anyone? And they say no. So you don't, and they might do that anyway, even if you give them the card, but at least, and you want to make sure that there's something in writing so that you can prove you did this. You don't see them in person, hand them the card, say it, you know, send them an email, use these cards, you know, the cards I gave you, make sure you use them for this and this. Because the more you can prove, the better off you are. And sometimes it's not even that they wouldn't say the same thing as you, it's that we can't find them, or they just don't show up, or you know, something else like that. And so then your confirming email would be all we need. Okay. Stay in close contact with your client and be responsive during the transaction. I don't know, you probably never heard that one before. If you are conducting an open house, keep a registry of all prospective buyers, including a note of whether there was a broker with the buyer. Also keep a record that the agent sitting in the open house, oh, maybe that's where I added the in. Ask the buyer if they were working with an agent. Okay, because you have to ask that if somebody comes in and by themselves, are you working with an agent? And if not, you can just give them a hard sell. But if they say yes, then you have to ask, you know, a bunch of other questions. How did you find the open house? Oh, you didn't find it through the other agent? Do you have a exclusive, you have a buyer broker agreement? No, I don't, or yes, I do. Here it is, but it's not exclusive. You know, there's still a lot of room here. Surprised being shown by brokers when you're not present. Oh, if you have a listing where the property is being shown by brokers when you are not present, leave a sign-in sheet with buyers' names and brokers' names similar to what you would get at a new home development. Include dates and times in the registry. Do people fill those out when if you leave those? Do the agent who comes in and shows the property actually fill them out, or they just ignore them? Or nobody?
I had an agent fill out my open house forms before.
They do.
Yeah, they want to make sure that they, you know, mark their territory for their client, I think.
Well, and that would be really good if that was, we don't care
Yeah.
what their reasoning, right? But I know that when you know, a listing ends, you have to give them a list of all the buyers who saw the property. And sometimes we don't have the name of the buyers. We only have the name of the broker who showed it.
Right.
So, any way we can get those names so we have them is always good. Okay, there are a couple of examples. Let's just do a couple. We could do this one, but it's way too easy. But okay. The following fact patterns are not to be construed as definite outcomes for similar real life situations. Because in your similar real life situation, you're going to be sitting in front of 3 people who are going to make a decision. And it just, you know, it just depends on who they are and how they feel and, you know, how the evidence is presented and, you know, what they hear and what they don't hear. They're just like people, which is why you could always try it out on pretty much any 3 people or any one person. Okay. Okay, all of the factors of a case must be considered by the panel determining procuring cause. Again, you can't change it and say, well, we're not looking at these 6. We don't care. You have to look at all of them. Again, it's only a guide for panelists, right? So we know who the intro, we know who the closing broker is, and we know the exclusive buyer agency contract. Okay. Buyers working with several agents and has shown the property by intro broker, but has no written agreement with him or her. 3 days later, buyer is shown the same property by closing broker, who, after ascertaining that buyer has no prior buyer's agreement, writes a successful offer and receives the commission. In the absence of other material facts favoring the broker, the factors favoring closing broker as the factors favor closing broker as the procuring cause. Showing the property first is only one factor, okay? According to the fact pattern, intro broker did not write an offer. Since buyer was working with several agents, may not have needed to spend a significant, and we don't know how much time they spent with them. Further, the absence of any agency agreement with intro broker is a factor that weighs against him. So that's why that's my italics. They didn't put that in italics. And that's why I put that in, because they seem to be saying that that could really help. And I don't think anyone is getting those from buyers right up front, unless you're doing a buyer broker agreement. So, and I apologize, it used to be called the buyer broker agreement, and now it's called the buyer representation and something broker commission agreement. But you guys know what I mean, I hope. Okay. So anyway, they're saying that the first person who showed it, that's all they did was show it, doesn't say anything about them following up, but there was no other important facts, not enough to be the procuring cause. Okay, one more. Intro broker had buyer sign an exclusive buyer contract. Intro broker showed some properties to buyer, but not the one buyer ultimately purchased. Closing broker asked buyer before showing any property to buyer whether buyer had signed any buyer's agency contracts or forms other than the agency disclosure form. Buyer replied, yes, I signed an exclusive buyer's agency contract, but don't worry about it. Show me some property. Closing broker, who was not a fool, then obtained the broker's agreement from the buyer and reviewed it. Closing broker discussed the situation with buyer. Closing broker told buyer that the importance of the written agency agreement with intro broker and that buyer was exposed to paying a commission to intro broker. Buyer nonetheless insisted on proceeding with closing broker and said, I'll take care of intro broker, don't worry. Closing broker showed buyer properties, buyer liked one, they did it, they closed. Okay, they wrote the offer, it was accepted. Okay. Intro broker files an arbitration for the commission claiming closing broker interfered with his contract with buyer. If the panel's inquiry, and this is one where they don't give you an answer. If the panel's inquiry reveals that closing broker did everything necessary to protect both intro broker and buyer, and there are no additional facts showing that closing broker lured buyer away from intro broker or otherwise engaged in behavior that would create factors favoring intro broker, the panel could find that closing broker is the procuring cause. Their ultimate conclusion depends on how the panel weighs the various factors, including the importance of the exclusive buyer agency contract, right? It appears the buyer may be the culprit here, and if intro buyer loses the procuring cause question with closing broker, intro broker still has a right to bring an action against buyer. So I don't know about you guys, but I don't agree with this. I think that he knew they had a contract and he interfered with it. I don't know. That's what I think. I get that he looked at it, he even saw it for himself and realized it was a real binding contract. He tells the buyer how important it is and that the buyer might have to pay the commission. And then what? And then they don't go after the buyer, they go after us. And you're going to probably have to give your commission. I mean, they say maybe it favors the closing broker, but I don't know. I think that when the closing broker sees that they have an agreement and realizes that, I mean, he does disclose that you might have to pay them, but he's still taking a client that's already under contract. I don't know. That's how I feel.
At that point, would it be prudent to get a hold harmless letter or something saying that the buyer would be responsible for their commission should anything happen?
Right. Before I would represent a client. Yeah, I mean, you could still do that, right? But it's not going to matter when you go to your hearing, right? You're still going to have to pay the commission.
Right. I'm just saying, because I did have a buyer that said, that's fine, I'm gonna pay their commission if needed.
Right.
And I did get that in writing, nothing ever happened, but I did get that, nothing formal.
Maybe
But
they paid them.
they understood and that they
Yeah.
knew that they were liable for the
Yeah,
commission.
and that maybe that's why they're saying it is basically all you have to do is disclose what the issues are. But the part that bothers me is that they don't have to just go after the buyer for doing it. They can go after your commission that you got. And now you have to go after the buyer.
Yeah.
And so, it might work, but it's certainly not what we want. Not if they can bring up procuring cause over it, then I don't like it. Right. Okay, I think that's probably plenty. They're all pretty much, most of them don't have, well, we could do the short one. Okay, same as the one above it, but the property purchased had previous, okay, so the same thing here, that they had the buyer broker agreement and the property that they purchased was first shown by the intro buyer. So not only now do they have the agreement, but the intro buyer showed the property. And now they're saying it's much more difficult because the factors are more evenly divided. So now we have these two huge factors, one on each side, right? You showed the property, but you wrote the offer, did everything else, and did all the rest. And again, the answer is it depends on how much weight the panel gives each factor. Well, how does that help us?
Oh my
Anyway.
God, that's terrible.
To carry the burden of proof for intro broker, right? And they think intro broker, like depending on the panel, it may well be sufficient to carry the burden of proof for intro broker. So that's what for sure I would think that. I mean, I thought it last time, so for sure I think it this time. But yeah. Oh my gosh. Okay, well, that's it for today. Let's stop sharing. I know this is kind of a complicated topic, but it's complicated because there's nobody can tell you it's this, and this. But buyer broker agreement or buyer rep agreement, that's the way to go. Any questions?
Well, I have a question, and maybe you can tell us or not. Based on what you just presented, even having that buyer broker agreement signed isn't sufficient. It's better to have it than not have it, but
Right.
it's not a done deal like it used to be.
Well, that's what, you know, in one side, out of one side of your mouth, they'd say, no, it's just one factor of many. And kind of on the other side, they have a whole section on it at the beginning, would have about how important it is and how it changes the game. So,
Right.
yeah, I mean, you're right, it's not a slam dunk, but it's pretty, you know, like I said, the one we went to, I don't think we had I thought we should have paid, we shouldn't have gone to the hearing. But yeah, they had it, we knew about it, and we just said, oh, we don't care, we're gonna represent this guy anyway. I don't know.
Yeah, no, that is obvious, but when and even when you're doing it, what you're supposed to be doing, you could still be in this predicament. That's actually pretty concerning.
I had okay, so my other big procuring cause, it was with an agent who, she got a call from someone looking for someone. She sold a lot of properties in one building, and she had someone that wanted a property in the building. She called all the owners. She wanted to know who's you know, was anybody planning on selling? Did anybody she made a whole chart of the building and the whole bid, and she found an owner whose property, who was already listed, but hadn't hit the market yet. But they already had a listing agent, and she showed it to him, and she made the introduction, and they all met there, and da 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 da. And he went, and then he goes, okay, well, now I'll have my broker write it up. And she was like, what? And that was it. And he had the broker write it up and handle the sale. And we closed, and we brought a procuring cause arbitration. This was so sad. And we won the first time. And then I'm telling you, these people were so shady. They found where one notice that was supposed to be given wasn't given. I mean, nothing to do with the hearing, you know, this notices they send ahead of these hearings. One of them wasn't properly given, and so we had to do the whole hearing again. And we lost the second time.
Oh my God.
The second time they brought different witnesses, and I'm telling you, it was a nightmare. But you know, we could, then I think we won. I think we should have won, because we proved we did more than, you know, we actually called people. We actually found this property that wasn't on the market yet. So, you know, you just never know.
Oh my gosh.
Right. I don't know who those people were, but we did win the first time. I was very proud.
So document.
Yeah, and you know, and
document.
confirming, you know, an email, right? Everything you can confirm, because I'll tell you, finding those buyers and sellers later who, you know, are going to testify and help you, it's a crapshoot.
No.
Sometimes they do, and sometimes they don't. So.
Yeah.
I have a
Okay,
quick
well, thank
question.
you all. If you guys, the last couple of weeks have been suggestions from people that they gave Robert last month for class topics. If you have any suggestions for class topics, I am always all ears, because it's hard to think of something every time.
I have
Okay.
a quick question, Cindy.
Yeah.
How can you hear me okay?
Yes.
I have my headphones on, then they can't hear me. How many days are the buyer agreements typically for?
Whatever you want
2
it to
months?
be, whatever you want it to be for. I mean, I've seen, you know, really ugly ones for 3 counties in a full year, but 60 days, 90 days, kind of like a listing agreement.
Okay.
I mean, you should have some idea that if I can't find you a property in this many days, I'm probably never going to.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
Except, and then I keep hearing differing opinions about whether you should even do them or not.
The buyer
A lot of
buyer
people,
agreement.
yeah, they'll say it's a turn off and this and that, but I feel like it's a good thing.
Well, that is really the only objection that I've ever heard, is that buyers balk at it. Which is why I tell people, if you have a buyer who balks at it, then just limit it to what you're actually showing them.
Yeah.
Because gosh, how many times have I had an agent say, yeah, I sent this property to these people, and now I find out they bought it with someone else. At
Yeah.
least you should buy from me if I send it to you, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, if that's better to get, you know, more general, a neighborhood or an area or whatever, but if that's all you can get, it's better than nothing.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, guys. I have a couple calls in.
Thank you, Cindy.
Thank you, Cindy.
Thank you, Cindy.